Morning everyone, it's Phil here. I've just got a small video for you today, but it might be small, but to me it's really important, and I hope by the end of it you realise why it means a lot to me, and it might mean a lot to all of us at the moment. Yeah, it's to do with the Apollo space program, and what we have to remember is that humans, as we know them, modern humans, Homo sapiens, have been around for about 200,000 years. And that means that if I live to be, say, 80, that means I had a 1 in 2,500 chance of being here when man first set sail from our planet out into the heavens. And that's fantastic to me, it really is. And what's even more amazing is that at the time, live TV and satellite communications had just been invented, and it made it possible for me as a very impressionable 13-year-old boy. I could sit on the living room carpet at 4 in the morning on a Monday in July 1969 and watch Neil Armstrong put his left foot on the moon 250,000 miles away, and I could see that happen live in real time, and that just blew me away. It was the most amazing thing, and one of the highlights of my life. And the thing about Apollo, it just boggles the mind with the numbers involved, and here are some of them. The first amazing fact is that it only took 8 years between President Kennedy announcing in 1961 that the goal was to fly man to the moon and bring him home safely again, up to the point where Neil Armstrong actually set foot on the moon in July 69. And what you have to remember is that at that moment when Kennedy made his speech, America had had one 15-minute suborbital flight with Alan Shepard, and that was the only manned flight that they had had. And to think of the scale of the work that was required to get from that position to walking on the moon in 8 years is fantastic. It cost the equivalent of $152 billion. It took 60% of the total output of integrated circuits in the world at that time to go just to Apollo. It took 400,000 Americans to be directly involved with that program. And the thing I love is about Saturn V, the rocket that carried man to the moon. The Saturn V was nearly 400 feet tall. It's still the biggest rocket the world has ever flown. And it produced 7.5 million pounds of thrust, which was enough to light New York for 75 minutes. I mean, the figures are absolutely incredible. It was an amazing program, and I'm so lucky to have been around while it was happening. And to show you the extent of my obsession, I thought I'd just show you some of my bits and pieces relating to Apollo, and then we'll look at a little story following that. So this is my little library in my living room, and if I just walk around this way, we can see that all of this bookcase here is aviation and space flight. If I show you some of that's an amazing book, Moonfire. So this is all Apollo. All these are Apollo, and then goes into sections on aircraft, and all that lot is about the Wright brothers. And this is all aviation, all of that lot, and quite a lot of this bookcase as well is aviation. So that just gives you a feel for how much I care about the Apollo space program. And if we walk down the stairs here, I can show you a couple of other things. So we've looked at my toy area before, but it's worth looking at it today for a couple of things. So you can see that the Saturn V rocket even dominates as a toy. It dominates all the other toys. And to give you some idea of the scale, if we look right down here, there are the 5 really powerful first stage engines. and we come up through each of the different stages of the Saturn V until we get to the very top here. And at the top is this bit here, which is the service module, and attached to it is the command module, which is where all 3 astronauts sat. And in this piece down here is the lunar module that the command and service module attached to once it was up in orbit. To try and give you a feel for the scale of this thing, if we look at the whole rocket here, I'm going to put on the shelf here a little Lego man to give you some idea of scale. I'll put him just there by the Avro Vulcan. So if I move back, you get some idea of the scale of Saturn V. I hope you're sort of getting the idea here. So I don't know if you can still see the little man. There he is. If I go back to him, an interesting little fact is that he is twice the height of a scale man compared to the rocket. So he would be a 10-foot giant in real life compared to the size of this model. That's the scale of Saturn V. Next to him we have a little piece here, I don't know if you can read it. It's the electrical cable that came from the Saturn launch gantry pad 39 that carried the power and data to and from the Apollo spacecraft prior to launch. So that's a really nice little artifact that I've got there. And this one means an awful lot to me, just over here. This is a piece of Kapton foil that was on the command module Columbia, which was actually used in the Apollo 11 flight. And so that is a real piece of foil off the actual command module, and that obviously has a big significance to me. We've got one more thing to go and have a look at. So here we have a Lego Saturn V, and that was built between myself and my son Sam, and next to it is the lunar module, which I built with my son Ben. And just to have a look at that, this gives you a feel for the lunar module with the astronauts to scale there, standing on the moon's surface. And you have to remember that that whole lunar module, the legs folded up and it all fitted inside the Saturn V right at the top next to the service module. The lunar module was in 2 parts. So the bottom, it landed on those legs, and then when it took off and went back up to the command module, the top half of it left and used the bottom half as a platform for takeoff. There's a couple of Apollo things that I forgot to show you to add to the collection. This one here is a little one. I don't know if you can see and read just here, that little pencil cross, that X in the box there, is written with a pencil that went aboard Apollo 15 and went down to the lunar surface in the lunar module. So that's one thing, and that's with a letter from Jim Irwin, who was one of the astronauts on 15. And then this is my sort of pride and joy, is a signed photo of the moon's surface, signed by Neil Armstrong, Mike Collins in the middle there, and Buzz Aldrin on the right. And I got that when I was in the States at the Reno Air Races some years ago. So that gives you a look at some of the bits and pieces I have related to Apollo. So there were 7 missions of Apollo to the moon, and there should have been therefore 14 moonwalkers, and there were only 12. So why was that? Well, that's because of Apollo 13, which was crewed by James Lovell, Jack Swigert and Fred Hayes. Halfway to the moon, a fuel cell exploded, and Jack Swigert announced, Houston, we've had a problem. The fuel cell produced oxygen for the crew to breathe and to create electricity. Now, fortunately, NASA and the crew were well trained, and they had to think and act very carefully and very fast because they only had about 15 minutes before the oxygen ran out. Luckily, they had a lifeboat. If this had happened returning from the moon rather than whilst travelling to the moon, then they would have been dead men. And why was that? That's because their only chance of survival rested in their lifeboat, which was the lunar module, which was still attached, obviously, to the command and service module. Now, the lunar module had only been designed to take 2 astronauts for 2 days. And of course, they had to survive as 3 astronauts for 4 days. And that created a lot of problems that they had to try and tackle. One of the problems was that they had to transfer hundreds of computer commands to the lunar module's navigation system so that it could take over getting them safely back to the Earth. And they only had that 15 minutes before the oxygen ran out to do that and to set up the lunar module ready for the 3 of them to survive. The most famous quote to come out of Apollo 13 was from the flight director at Mission Control called Krantz, and his famous saying was, "Failure is not an option." And that's a very good maxim, I think, for everyone. And from my view, together with Armstrong's first step on the moon, I think Apollo 13 was really the highlight of the Apollo program. And the reason why is because it took a fantastic combination of skill, knowledge, determination, team spirit and good luck that brought them through their crisis. And I believe it's the same attributes which will help us all get through the crisis that we're facing today. So tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of the launch of Apollo 13. And I hope that this story has been interesting for everyone. And I'm sure if we follow their example that we can all get through this crisis if we stay together and stay strong. So that's it for this little video. I hope you enjoyed it. And come back obviously next time for more of Phil's Fun for Fogies. Stay safe. Bye bye.